it's weird for Kansas, where I'm from, to be like more conservative than Texas, but it's fine. It's fine because Texas caught up. They've officially caught up, okay? Back when, way back when, last year, you might have seen a video on my channel about, I think it was last year anyway, or earlier this year, time is a flat circle. I talked about how there was a bathroom bill here in Kansas. So like in one fell swoop, they decided that we cannot use public restrooms according to our gender that we identify with. You have to use legally the bathroom of which you were assigned at birth, which for me basically means like, I don't know how people are going to perceive me on a day-to-day basis. Like, so I'm just not going to use public restrooms to not even come close to the risk of getting arrested. So basically I can't use public restrooms. In the same thing, in the same law, they were like, and for the purposes of recording public health information, you must be designated on your driver's license and your birth certificate as the sex you were assigned at birth. Previously, like years and years ago when I changed my legal gender, you could change it on your driver's license, but not your birth certificate. And then temporarily, like not temporarily, like they changed a law that made it so where you could update your birth certificate, which I didn't do. And now they're like, nope, you don't have a legal right for your documentation to accurately reflect what you actually look like and the life that you're actually living now. And then Texas has now caught up with this, except like, I don't even think that this was a law that passed. As far as I can tell, this is an executive policy. So it's really interesting looking at all these different things happening across the country where in some cases, and like, I think this is the way that Texas tends to do these things, is they just make executive declarations. Like they just decided to say that getting your kid gender affirming care is child abuse and therefore we will start an investigation. And that was a problem for a bit. And so like, they actually did that after a law failed to pass through the legislative system, you know, House, Senate, you know, the people who we actually elected who are supposed to be able to write the laws and make these decisions. They did not successfully pass the law making it illegal for youths to access hormone care. So they just decided to do it executively. Yeah, this is Attorney General Ken Paxton, who once famously hid in a garage from a process server serving him court papers. Excellent. So yeah, this is, in Kansas, it was a law that has now been, you know, challenged in the courts. And as far as I know, we haven't heard anything new about that in a while. But this in Texas here is just an executive policy. And it's an executive policy to ignore court orders. So let's read this article I have here. Trans Texans will not be able to change the sex listed on their driver's license according to a new policy change. Yeah, they will not be able to change the sex on their license unless it is to fix a clerical error, like if it was misrecorded when you were born or something, which was confirmed by Sherry Gibson, the chief of the driver's license division at the Texas Department of Public Safety. Of course, this change comes as like, yeah, conservatives are getting more conservative. Trans Texans could previously change the sex listed on their driver's license by bringing an original certified court order or an amended birth certificate verifying the change. As of Wednesday, that information is no longer available on their website. A spokesperson for the Department of Public Safety sent a statement late Wednesday explaining the change by pointing to Attorney General Ken Paxton. The agency said in an unsigned statement, quote, "The Office of the Attorney General has recently raised concerns regarding the validity of court orders being issued which purport to order state agencies, including DPS, to change the sex of individuals in government records, including driver's licenses and birth certificates. Neither DPS nor other government agencies are parties to the proceedings that result in the issuance of these court orders, and the lack of legislative authority and evidentiary standards for the courts to issue these orders has resulted in the need for a comprehensive legal review by DPS and the Attorney General's office. Therefore, we are no longer accepting these court orders as a basis to change sex identification in department records, including driver's licenses." It's really interesting. So they're saying like, yeah, there is no good law. Basically, they're claiming that there's no good law here. It's just been handled by the courts, which I think was also the case with, You know, in like Oregon, like the first states that were passing or that were submitting X on your driver's license, it was just like a thing that was being done by the local DMV. And then there were challenges, and then it became like a more explicit law. Yeah, how do you determine if it's a clerical error? Mitternacht and I are here to ask you to hit like on the video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe. Click the bell if you feel like it. You don't have to, though. Feel free to check out the other links in the description because I sell merch like this cute tank top. I'm running a GoFundMe to try to move 2,000 miles across the country to a place where I have rights. And I have a Patreon he's smashing his face against my face. So obviously this is something that impacts people. If your identity documentation, like, first of all, I am not really in favor of having a gender on it anyway. Like, you should have a picture and you either look like your picture or you don't, right? What purpose, what utility is there to having a sex designation on your license, like, or even your birth certificate? Like, I don't really know what utility that serves. I guess it helps you count the population, but I don't know, why would you need that? But more immediately, it's an issue of, okay, well, you're outed as trans. Lots of trans people don't look trans. We succeed in passing in society and nobody knows that we're trans. It's not all of us, but plenty of us do. And so if you try to get a job and your gender marker on your ID doesn't match your appearance, oh, boom, they know you're trans. And maybe they won't give you a job. And the same thing with housing. You can't necessarily prove that they didn't give you the housing or didn't hire you because of you being trans. It's really hard to prove those things. They'll just be like, well, we had a better candidate or whatever, you know. So the problem is that, yeah, this has an immediate impact on whether people are housed and employed, which is like, yeah, that's the immediate problem. But additionally, in this particular instance, so in this leaked email that Mama provided in the chat, so effective immediately, the department will not accept court orders or amended birth certificates that change the sex when it was different from what was already on file. The validity of such documents is currently under review. For current driver's license and ID holders, the sex established at the time of original application and listed in the driver record will not be changed unless there was a clerical error. The sex will reflect the sex listed on the primary document presented upon original application that is already on file. This does not mean we will deny the issuance of or renewal of the driver's license. So basically, it's the same as in Kansas, where my current ID says what I want it to say, but if I were to stay living here and get it renewed in a couple years, they will revert it forcibly back to what it was when I was born. So, okay. The issuance can proceed with documentation on file. This decision will be left up to the customer. If a first-time application presents conflicting documents, such as a birth certificate with a court order requiring a sex change, the sex listed on the original birth certificate will take precedence. We will continue to make corrections when a clerical error has been made. All court order sex change documentation that cannot be processed should be scanned into the record. All court order sex change documentation that cannot be processed, because they're not processing any of it now, should be scanned into the record, and the customer's name and driver's license ID number be emailed to dlcourtorders@dps. Please notate on the email subject line, sex change court order. Changes resulting from clerical errors do not need to be reported. Okay, so... Okay, this email address is for internal reporting only and should not be shared with customers. Customers should continue to report issues using the customer service portal. So the problem here is, like, they are collecting information about people who have attempted to get this gender change done. And my understanding is that they have also collected information already. So, like, anybody who has already submitted this request to change gender, like Mama, who is here in the chat and lives in Texas, went through this process 2 years ago. So it seems as though Ken Paxton, and the same thing happened in Kansas, by the way. Like, my name is on a list on Chris Kobach's desk that it says, like, this person is a tranny. They changed their gender. So it's the same thing. The same thing here in Texas, where they're making a list and checking it twice. And it's like, why do you need a list of all of the people who have changed their gender? It's, we're getting very Godwin's law here, but it's like, it's pretty scary to know that your name is on some list. And like, this is part of why I am moving to a state that just lets you declare your gender when you get your driver's license and doesn't require you to do all this court. Like, yeah, it's giving Red Scare for sure. So yeah, Texas following Kansas in just, and it's the weird thing to me about this too is like the executive, there is no like, they're not trying to pass a law. They're just saying on an executive level, like, oh, we, the Department of Public Safety, which is like an executive agency, has decided like, we are just going to not honor these court orders, which have been, this process has been working this way for a while. We're just not going to deal with it. That was the same way that it worked in Kansas too, was like you would get a court order. Well, if not for your driver's license, you could just change your driver's license if you got a letter that said you had medically transitioned. But in order to change it on your birth certificate, yeah, it's a court order. And like, I just wanted to highlight this because while this is happening at this level where the executive is like ignoring both the legislative and the judicial process, meanwhile, we have like on the federal level, these judges overriding the executive, like the, you know, canceling of the Chevron doctrine, the Air Force claiming that the EPA does not have the power to compel them to clean up forever chemical spills that they've, you know, tainted Arizona's water supply with. And then I didn't want to do a full segment on this, but a judge has also struck down the Biden admin's ban on worker non-compete agreements. So like the Federal Trade Commission is supposed to be able to regulate business, and the courts are just stepping in and saying, you are not allowed to do that. Like, excuse you, stay in your lane. So it's just really weird. Like this, it feels like there is such a tension in like a competition of power. Like who is allowed to make these decisions? Well, on the federal level, basically, like, I mean, you know, in a situation where the federal government is currently being ruled by a Democrat, the courts are like gutting executive powers. But in conservative Texas, the executive, which is conservative, is just basically like overriding the more purple parts of the government, like the legislative body. And I don't know if the judges are, I don't know, whatever. The judges are probably leaning conservative, really, but just trying to say like, no, you don't. Yeah, the courts are not letting anybody else do their jobs on the federal level. But yeah, and like a runaway abuse of executive power at the state level, in Texas at least. In plenty of these red states, these laws are passing through the legislative process. A competition of power, not really. Republicans abuse power, Democrats do less than nothing. There's no competition. Yeah, I guess, you know, what I mean is to say that like the whole premise, at least the premise that we're taught in our high school government class, is that we're supposed to have a balance of powers where, you know, the judges determine whether something is constitutional and the legislative body writes laws and the executive has certain privileges of like passing or denying the laws. Like, you know, like it's supposed to be fairly balanced, but it's like a power grab moment here where on the federal level, again, the judges are overstepping their bounds, in my view, and they need to be checked by the other branches. And how do we do that? Well, you know, we've discussed doing like expanding the court or creating harsher term limits. I say harsher term limits, like in some cases we don't have any term limits for judges. So yeah, like term limits. And I also think that in Texas, the executive is overreaching and is, you know, basically overstepping its power, and that the courts and the legislature need to step in and be like, no, you can't just like unilaterally decide this. Actually, we need that checks and balances thing to start actually checking things and bringing back some balance, because right now it just seems like disproportionately weighted toward the conservatives, no matter what the situation is. Like when it's, again, executive power, Ken Paxton, he's overreaching in support of conservatism. And then with these judges, they're overreaching in support of conservative ideals as well. even though judges are really supposed to be like, they're supposed to be non-partial, like they're supposed to be non-partisan, impartial, excuse me. And yeah, Florida and Tennessee have also made these decisions, like banning gender changes entirely from Aaron Reed. Look, Florida, Tennessee, and Kansas have all done this. And they're trying to hide the fact that they're making a list of everybody who's done these changes. And that's like the scary thing on top of everything else. Like, yeah, it sucks to lose your right to accurate documentation. But more than that, it is scary to know that they are putting people's names on a list. They're creating a database of trans people and intersex people. And they tried to hide that. They said, this is a leaked email. This email that we were looking at, it is not intended for the public to know this. Tennessee never allowed birth certificate changes. Well, but they did allow driver's license changes, and they've just completely wiped all of that away. To be fair, those versions of how we teach the government in schools is as dumbed down as how we teach blood types, chromosomes, sex, and gender. Schoolhouse rocks. Yeah, I mean, yes. But in principle, even though it is more complicated, even though there are more layers, on a fundamental level, the whole goddamn point of having 3 branches of government is to try to create a situation where, like, okay, if they pass a law, we need someone to interpret whether that law is in line with the Constitution. And if the president, overreaches his executive powers, or like, if he tries to declare war, like the other branches of government have to also greenlight that decision, right? Because doesn't the Senate have to agree when the president declares war? Yeah, like why would they hide the fact that they're making a list of these people? Like, yeah, that's the unsettling bit. If it wasn't for a scary reason, why would they obscure that? Why would they hide it? So if you live in a red state, holy cow, get out of there. I have a GoFundMe so that I can get out of Kansas because my name is on a list. Like there is a database of trannies in Kansas, and your boy's name is on that list. So if you can, and like there are people in chat who have, if you see anybody having a GoFundMe, whether it's me or someone else, like I know Mama Mephistopheles in the chat also has one. Like if you can pitch in $5, please do, because every little tiny bit helps when you're trying to get out of somewhere where like the fascists are collecting a list of undesirables. Problem. I think a lot of Republicans are misled and they believe the soft narrative while hiding the true fascist beliefs. So hiding it makes a lot of sense from a tactical standpoint. Yeah, I mean, because I think that, I believe that certain individuals in the government are much more overtly fascist in what their intentions are. But in order to keep getting voted in, they do need to hide that information from their own voters, their Republican voters. Because many Republican voters are sick of this too. Keep that in mind. We've looked at this before. I think we were looking at data from South Carolina, some polling data showing that like the majority of Republican voters believe that healthcare decisions around trans children should be made between the parents and the doctors. Like they don't, like a lot of Republican voters do not believe in this government overreach into trans people's lives. Most of them think that they would rather be focused on the economy, or, just generally we should let doctors make informed decisions for their patients. Yeah, it's sad to be relieved that you didn't ever try to change your gender marker, Fennec. Yeah, it's sad that the dislike of paperwork ended up keeping me off some creepy fascist list. Yeah. It's uncool. Making a list, checking it twice. And who the hell knows what they're going to do with that information? Who knows what they're planning? I'm not going to jump to and saying like, yeah, they're going to put us all in camps, or they're going to criminalize this or something. Like, I don't know. You can't say definitively, but you can say like, I don't think you have a good reason for doing this. Like, why do you need to make a list of everybody who has ever made this change? I'm having a hard time imagining a non-nefarious reason for this behavior. So yep, I'm gonna leave. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. The behavior of the Republicans motivated me to get a passport, because that's also a lot of paperwork. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're like, I think I need to be prepared to leave. I need a go bag. I need my passport. I still haven't gotten my passport. I will probably soon, but I'm basically like, my personal opinion is that you're better off in a blue state than you are trying to go to another country. I just feel like, progressive places in the United States are probably safer. And I'm hoping that I'm not wrong about that. Mama says someone who was going to put us in camps would do this. I'm not gonna obscure this. I feel just fine assuming genocidal intent, right? I don't feel confident saying that it's not genocidal intent. Yeah, and even if there were no malicious intent, the list would still exist for someone to abuse down the road. What are you going to do with this list? I live in Florida and would like to at least get hormone blockers at minimum or HRT. Would that put me on a list? I can't get the wording right on Google right now. I think, obviously your healthcare providers and any pharmacy you get that information, or sorry, any pharmacy you get that medicine from would be like, they would have that data, but that's supposed to be your private medical data, which is different than like data from the government being collated for the purpose of public databases of this stuff. Because like, presumably the database also, you could be like, yeah, so approximately 51% of citizens are female because of the sex designation on their driver's license or the birth certificate or whatever. So this is, I think that your information would not be available to the government unless you were changing your government documentation. But I mean, it's Florida, so really my advice is to get out of Florida immediately. And yeah, this is all with Project 2025 looming in the background because these, radical conservatives consider the mere existence of trans people to be pornographic and inappropriate for children. Could easily see this being used for legalized government persecution if MAGA wins the election. Fair, right? Yeah, that's the thing, is like, are we as trans people, just because we exist, going to be criminalized because our existence is like obscene and like it's the equivalent of physically harming children, basically? It feels like I was snatched up and dropped into a worse timeline. It does feel like the worst timeline. We can hope that if Harris and Walz win, which I'm assuming that they will, then maybe there will be more federal protections. Like, I know my coworker Josie, who you may have seen me with on the Transatlantic Call-In Show on Thursdays, she is hopeful that we will be able to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, which would put legislative protections for trans and queer people. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know what else I can add on this. Like, it's terrifying and it's not cool. It's not appropriate in my opinion. And who knows? Who know? May you live in interesting times. True. Thank you so much to all my patrons, but especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvog, Jack, Amanda B, Michelle Frateroli, Michelle Winter, Wellington Marcus, Danielle McDonald, DZXN, Elavie Nobody, Pastel Infinity, Suzanne Maynard, Nova, Desi Quiche, Celeste, Athiette, Jamie Jam, Sojo, Bean, Kevin Young, Mr. Atheist, Liam Hodgson, Elizabeth Bartell, and Jericho.